Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. So I'm building a Strat today, and I've got a lot of parts here, and I want to tell you about each and every one of them. I've been doing a little prep work to prepare for this series, getting the body ready, and obviously I've done this pick guard already, but even still, I think this is going to be a multi-part series, so I hope you'll hang with me through the whole thing. Just be sure to subscribe. If you didn't catch my previous video on putting this pick guard together, the Strat loaded pick guard, check that thing out. This thing has Fleor pots, Fender knobs, a nice set of Alnico cloth wired pickups, and a CRL switch. All really good quality parts, and I think they're going to go well on this build. Otherwise, I've got a nice sunburst body here. I believe the brand is Yin Fente. I'll have to double check that, but I got a good deal on this on eBay. Then I've got a Starcaster neck that I've done some modifications to, and I'll show you those. I've got an old Squire tremolo that I've done some modifications to as well. Got a nice set of Wilkinson tuners and all the chrome parts to put this thing together. So let's go ahead and get started. So I mentioned that I'm using a Starcaster neck on this build, and you can start to see from the headstock here some of the modifications I've already made. I've doweled the two holes for the string trees, and I went ahead and removed the finish on the headstock. And I've gone ahead and put back a sort of natural stain that matches the yellowing on the sides. I also have installed a blank bone nut here in the nut slot. And then here on the heel side, I went ahead and put dowels into the holes here as well. So basically what I've got now is a neck that's ready to be re-drilled specific to this body. So some interesting things about the Starcaster neck in general. It's got a pretty wide heel. It's got a 56mm heel, which is basically 2 3/16 inches if you're familiar with the vintage Strat dimensions. And it's got a 42mm wide nut. Not quite as wide as a lot of American Strats, but it's about 2mm wider than a Squire Affinity. The headstock shape is almost like a Stratocaster, but it's just a little bit different in this indentation here. The normal Stratocaster has more of a rounded ball on the end of it with a sharper point here in the curve. At a glance, it looks pretty much like a 70s headstock. Otherwise, it's got a nice rosewood board and some nice wide frets, and I think it's going to work great for this project. Now, I mentioned I've done some prep work to the body, and mainly what that consisted of so far was clearing some of the finish out of the neck pocket area so that I can get that 56mm wide neck to fit in here nicely. I also took a neck plate, positioned it on the back of the guitar, and went ahead and marked and drilled these holes here. I've drilled these out to 3/16 of an inch. That is vintage Fender correct. You can see also that I've been doing a little bit of testing about where my bridge is going to be already. I just wanted to make sure that the neck pocket and all of these pickup holes were aligned whenever the neck is in place, and luckily they are. That didn't really consist of much more than laying a straight edge on both sides of the neck, finding the center line here, and just making sure that it centers up with the route in the body. Now, the neck to the body joint is a real important joint in any guitar build, and on this one I've got everything fitting snug but not too tight. To clean out the neck pocket, I used a combination of sandpaper, some files, and a razor blade. Now, this being a vintage style Strat body, it doesn't have a swimming pool route or dual humbucker routes or anything like that. It's actually routed for 3 single coils. I really like that. It's really true to the vintage Strat, but it can present some problems depending on the pickups that you're using and the parts fitment in terms of the pick guard. So I mentioned this pick guard that I had built previously in another episode. The pickups on the back are fiber bobbin Alnico 5 pickups with cloth wire. I've got nice cloth wiring everywhere, and I've got all vintage style components in here. The only issue that I've run into is when I'm test fitting this, some of the routes of the pickups are not quite big enough for the bobbins on this pickup set, and so I'm going to have to do a little bit of routing or filing or something to enlarge those pickup holes just a little bit. I'm going to use a pretty inexpensive little router for this that I got from Harbor Freight. And I've done a little bit of investigation beforehand, and I know kind of where I need to take off some of the material. I think I need to take off some here at the top of this pickup, some here at the bottom of this pickup, and then widen each one just a little bit. To prevent from scratching everything, I'm going to apply some tape, and then I'll get right to routing. After all that, everything's fitting nicely. And so I think I'm ready to move on. Now the Starcaster neck has a regular size tuner hole or a modern size tuner hole, but I wanted to add a little bit of a vintage flavor, so I'm choosing these Wilkinson tuners with a mini button on there. This headstock is not drilled for the screws that hold the tuners in place, so I'm going to have to drill those. But the way I like to install these is to put them in the headstock first, tighten the nuts on the front, and that will hold them in place while I drill for all 6 of these screws. Get these things snugged up a little bit with a wrench so that they don't move easily, but they do move. And then put a straight edge along the bottom edge of all the tuners and get them all lined up. Turn your buttons all the same way and get the gaps even between each one, and then you're ready to drill. Then once they're screwed in on the back side, you want to snug them up one more time on the front side. Just don't over tighten them. These are the Wilkinson Easy Lock tuners, so they have 2 sets of holes in the post set perpendicular to each other, and you're supposed to wrap the string in through both of them. Before you get your neck mounted is a good time to mount your strap buttons, and that's really just because of the location of this upper one that's harder to drill with the neck in place. I'm going to be using a set of Fender Player strap buttons, and I've got a brand new set of Fender felts installed on these. Now you can measure your locations for your strap buttons, or you can eyeball them, and I've done a little bit of both. I measured to make sure they were centered front to back, but I kind of eyeballed the center line. I usually drill my pilot holes for my screws to be about the same size as the shaft of the screw without the threads, but I'll come back with a larger drill bit just to clear out some of the finish around this hole so that it doesn't crack the finish as I install the new screw. And the safest way to do this is to run your drill bit in reverse to just get through the finish and not take off and drill that hole any bigger. Here's a look at all the cleaned up routes. I've got all the finish out of all 3 of these pickup holes now and in the neck pocket, and I've taken some of the finish away in the control cavity, and that's really just to make sure that everything fits right with my pick guard. So far so good. I checked the neck mounting as well. With the neck in place, everything's lining up here in the neck pocket, which I like, and I double checked the bridge quite a bit as I go through this whole process. I've got the bridge locations marked for some of the screws, at least the outside 2, and I've got a center line drawn all the way through where this goes. The most important thing to make sure of is that you had 25.5 inches, if that's your scale length, and mine is, from the inside of your nut to this saddle here. It looks pretty good. Alright, well it's time to mount this neck, and I've clamped it in place just to hold it while I actually mark the holes from the body into the neck itself. And you can use a punch to do this. In my case, I just sharpened a nail, and I've been using it to mark the location. So I'll just take a hammer and tap this in, and that will put a little divot in the neck, exactly where the neck hole should go. And it's a whole lot easier to drill the neck when it's not on the guitar. So I'm going to undo this clamp, take the neck off, and drill it. Now I won't drill these any deeper than I have to. I went ahead and measured how far the screws protrude through into the neck pocket, and I've set a little tape depth stop on my drill bit so that I don't go any further than that. The last thing I would want to do is send my drill bit through my fretboard. Well folks, I think we're going to call it quits for this weekend's episode, but look forward to next weekend and we'll mount the bridge, mount that pick guard, do some of the wiring, and maybe try to get as far as some of the setup. As always, I appreciate all the likes and the comments. I appreciate when you guys subscribe. Please visit my Amazon links, and I'll see you guys next time.